Dear learners, in the previous video, we discussed in detail about hedonism. We saw that hedonists believe in that pleasure and happiness are intrinsically good, which means that pleasure and happiness have goodness in themselves. But are pleasure and happiness the only things that are intrinsically good or good in themselves? Are all other qualities just of instrumental value? Is the goodness of other qualities just based on how they can be used to generate other good? Let us look at how other qualities like knowledge, other moral qualities, and self-realization figure in the theory of good. Let us discuss these also. Each person has his or her own set of rights or wrongs or moral norms. Let us now discuss the idea of ethical pluralism. Ethical pluralism is the idea that there are many theories about what is right and what is wrong, which may be incompatible or which may be incommensurable with a person's own individual personal moral norms. So, the moral norms in general for others or characters of distinguishing between right and wrong may be different for different people. We have seen that according to hedonism, pleasure or happiness is intrinsically good. Even the critics of hedonism also don't deny this view, but at the same time they accept other things also as intrinsically good, which means that pleasure and happiness are not the only things that are good in themselves. There are other characters, there are other qualities, there are other things also which have an intrinsic good about themselves. Let us come to the example of knowledge. Against the hedonistic view proclaiming that it is happiness alone that is intrinsically good, the pluralists poised a number of moral qualities of human beings as having intrinsic worth. We all know that knowledge is good, knowledge is power, knowledge is an instrument of advancement of human civilization. It is also used as an instrument of human happiness and pleasure. When you know that certain disease, for example COVID, is contagious, you can avoid getting exposed to it by taking precautions like washing hands, wearing a mask, etc. Knowledge is good for its own sake. We study philosophy, mathematics, or any other subject like physics or biology to acquire knowledge and not with the objective that this knowledge will add to world's happiness. So, not all knowledge that is acquired with the intention of adding to world's happiness. It is also acquired for its own good, because gaining knowledge by itself is good. Many thinkers, including the hedonists, do not consider the intrinsic worth of knowledge. They say that though it is good to have knowledge, its value is instrumental and not inherent like happiness or liberty. Arguing against knowledge as an inherent good, they hold that when knowledge is good, it is only instrumentally good and also not under all circumstances. There are many cases where true knowledge is concealed from a person to save them from frustration, anguish, or anxiety. For example, if a person is suffering from some terminal ailment, generally the relatives decide and the doctors decide not to disclose it to the person so as to save that person from anxiety, from anguish, and from such other negative feelings. There are conditions or circumstances in which knowledge, far from being an intrinsic value, is not a value at all. So, according to hedonism, it is happiness which is intrinsically good and not knowledge. The goodness of knowledge depends on its happiness potential, which means how much happiness a knowledge is able to generate. Now let us come to another character of the ethical which the ethical pluralists hold good, which is the moral qualities. According to pluralists, qualities like kindness, honesty, truthfulness, benevolence, loyalty, generosity, goodwill, etc. are valuable in themselves. But the hedonists are of the view that such qualities are valuable only as means to bring more happiness to the world, and hence their values are only instrumental. Indeed, all these qualities can be used for either good or for evil. Now you would be wondering how honesty, how kindness, how loyalty can be evil. We definitely know that these qualities are good, but we may be wondering how these qualities can be evil. Moral qualities are not always instrumentally good. Loyalty, honesty and generosity are evil when used for bad causes, as exemplified by fanatics' loyalty towards their party, where they will be willing to slaughter thousands of people rather than give up their beliefs. Similarly, if a person is being too generous to a lazy person, then his generosity will add to more laziness. Similarly, if a doctor tells the truth to a patient who is suffering from some incurable disease or a terminal ailment, it will do more harm to the patient than good. The pluralists, however, attach intrinsic values to these qualities even when they have bad consequences. For them, values are more important than the happiness they cause. The hedonists' counter argument is that though a world without moral values is not worth living, still their values are instrumental. If virtues are deleted from the goal of happiness in which the instrumental values reside, then one is faced with a question like, what are all these virtues for? Why cultivate them at all? What end do they serve? So the hedonists believe that if these virtues do not contribute to happiness, then these virtues are not intrinsically good or do not have an intrinsic goodness about themselves. The pluralists are of the view that happiness obtained by wrongful means cannot be sustained for long. On the other hand, happiness achieved by exercise of moral qualities is abiding, is deep, and it is more self-satisfying. The exercise of desirable human traits is not merely an instrument for the achievement of greater human happiness. These traits are desirable in themselves, and people usually value them for themselves. The more kindness, fairness, generosity, goodwill, wisdom, all these qualities, the more they prevail in the world, the better becomes the world to be a place to live. The exercise of moral values is thus not merely instrumental to the achievement of happiness, but has a value of its own, independent of its happiness potential. Because these moral values, according to pluralists, makes the world a better place to live. Now let us look at the concept of self-realization. The term self-realization has been used to indicate two kinds of growth. The meaning most frequently given to self-realization is that of psychological growth and maturation, of the awakening and manifestation of latent potentials of human beings. For example, the awakening of ethical values, of aesthetic values, and religious experiences and activities. The second kind of self-realization is the realization of the self, the experience and awareness of the synthesizing spiritual center. Self-actualization may be achieved at different levels and does not necessarily include what can be called the spiritual level. According to the view of the proponents of self-realization, the only thing that is good for its own sake is the development of man's best capacities as human beings. Man is endowed with different capacities and proper realization of which leads to full human development. For example, during adverse circumstances, many people, they come to a self-realization of their hidden talents, of their abilities, of their capabilities during times of crisis, during times of their extreme lows. They come to a self-realization. Man is often unable to realize these capabilities or capacities to the full. As a result, most of these, which could have been added to his or her human growth, remain underdeveloped. So, self-realization is very important for a person to realize his or her self-worth, to realize his or her the hidden talents that a person possesses, to realize the inner capabilities of a person, so that the person can grow or the person can develop to his or her full potential. Man possesses both human and animal instincts or potentialities. When we refer to self-realization, we mean only human qualities or capabilities. For example, the qualities like generosity, truth, non-violence, physical, moral and intellectual abilities, skills, etc. Aristotle, speaking on such qualities, had opined that exercising one's best capacities meant exercising the capacity that is unique to a man and the rational faculty of reason. Man shares many of his capacities for growth with animals, but capacities like reason and morality are such faculties that he shares with no other species. So, you see that, for example, certain human qualities are also shared by the animals, whereas two most important capacities or two most important qualities which are shared only by human are that of reason and that of morality. Man is the only species which can discipline oneself to be moral. All living species except man are programmed by nature to perform actions required for their survival. But man alone has capacities to choose a value action that he thinks is appropriate for his survival. Choosing a code of values is uniquely human. For example, in order to survive, animals have this killer instincts. They will go and kill or they will go and hunt. But man is the only species which can restrain himself from killing other person for his or her own survival. Another example of man being able to exercise some qualities is of man being rational. Animals may not be rational, they may not be able to apply rational thoughts to their actions. Man is the only species who can exercise rationality to their actions, who can conduct their actions in such a way that they are rational. Man's life is based on a code of ethics. In this system of ethics, man's life is the ultimate value that all other values serve, including happiness. This is the one thing that is the end in itself. But a question arises, will it be wrong for a man ever to risk his life? Not at all. For instance, if a man is compelled to live in such human conditions where freedom of thought and actions are suppressed, he might very well risk his or her life to escape such conditions. In many other instances, man puts his life to risk in order to prefer some other action. For example, a person may put his or her life to risk in order to save another person or in order to save a loved one. A more recent doctrine, close in some respects to self-realization, is contained in the ethical theory given by the philosopher and the famous novelist Ayn Rand. According to this view, good is that which is proper to the life of man as a rational being. Ayn Rand's ethics begins by analysis of the term value. She maintains that values arise from and are necessitated by the distinctive nature of living beings. Value is that which one prefers and is an object of action which presupposes alternatives. So, according to Ayn Rand, man will choose actions or man will choose objects which he or she values. You value an object or thing which you prefer and choose from alternatives for which action is necessary. If you reflect upon different alternatives, you will see that most fundamental alternative in the universe is existence or non-existence. The issue of life or death. It is the concept of life that makes the concept of other values possible. It is only to a living person that the things can be good or evil. Thus, it is the existence, nature and the needs of living organisms that make existence of values possible and necessary. Man is not born with automatic innate knowledge of what is good or evil for him. To acquire this knowledge, man must think, and think is an act of choice. That is, if man is to live, he must choose to think and hold life as his standard of value. The code of values that his life requires is a code of ethics. So finally, to conclude, today we learnt about ethical pluralism, in which we discussed other things which possess intrinsic values like knowledge and moral qualities. We also discussed in detail about self-realization. We also discussed how man is born without the knowledge of what is good and what is bad, and it is the process of thinking, which leads to self-realization and which leads to development of a code of ethics for humans. I hope you enjoyed this topic. Thank you.